All right, so we are continuing our trudge through Romans chapter 1. And so this is week 3, where we're going to add 2 whole verses to the pile of verses of Romans 1 that are behind us and that we can use to inform the pile of verses that are still in front of us. All right, and so these 2 verses that we're going to do this morning, we've technically already read them. But we're going to talk about them this morning. So we're still exploring this idea of general revelation. And so if you weren't here last week, then you might need to know that general revelation is the things that are revealed about God that are not specific. All right, so the Bible would be considered like special revelation. So that's things that are defined words, defined message that we usually get in words. And so general revelation is insight that you can get about God just from like looking out the window or even looking into your own heart. All right, so these are basically ways that God has revealed himself to everybody, including people that have never seen the Bible. And last week we saw that one aspect of that is where Paul says that which is known about God is clearly understood through that which has been made. And so we talked about the design and the intricacies of nature and how they powerfully suggest that somebody put all this in motion and set up the system in a designed way. And also that only a certain type of being would be capable of that. And we deduced that it would have to be an infinite and personal God. And so this morning, we're going back to a verse that we did read last week. And it's Romans 1:19. And Paul says something that's slightly different here than the part that we explored last week. He says, that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. And so it's not only through what has been made like out there that we know that there must be a creator God, but also within us. There is something that, potently suggests that God must be real. All right. And so that's what we're going to look at this morning. And we're going to be focusing on a specific aspect of that called the evidence from internal consistency. And so this has also been called the presuppositional argument for the existence and the nature of God. Presuppositional is kind of a big word. I don't really like to do that to you, but it's not that bad if you break it into its different parts, right? A presupposition is something that you presuppose. So you suppose these things to be true before you even start thinking. Okay, these are like assumptions about things. And people do start with certain assumptions. All right, that's the place where you start to think. And your assumptions may not line up with what we say we believe or the way that we live. And I would also suggest that the things that we say we presuppose are often not the things that we really presuppose. So we sometimes behave in ways that are inconsistent or even dishonest in regard to the assumptions that we say that we have. All right, so a lot of times people act in ways that completely contradict what they say they have for beliefs. And so if you've been around for a few years, then you've probably heard people say things like, actions speak louder than words. And we all know that there's a part of that that's really true. And so if you really believe something, then your actions should flow out of that. And they should demonstrate that you believe that. But if your actions contradict your claimed beliefs, or if the statements that you make contradict things that you earlier said that you believed, then you must be either confused or maybe dishonest. Okay, so you're claiming that you believe something that's really not at all what you believe. You believe something different. All right, so I have a couple of examples of what I'm talking about here. These are pretty extreme examples just to illustrate what I'm talking about. All right, we will get into stuff that's a little bit more believable in a minute. So let's say you've got a friend that says he does not believe in gravity and that it has no effect on him. But you and he go up in a little plane, and when the engine fails on the plane, he starts looking for a parachute. All right, I thought that gravity didn't exist, man, and that it would have no effect on you. So that's conflict, right? Like, that's contradictory. So sometimes your friend will even still insist that he doesn't believe in gravity, even though he's behaving as if gravity does exist. All right, that does not mean that that's what he really believes just because he says it. And it should certainly raise some questions about what he really believes. So maybe your wife tells you that she loves you, but she also tells you that she's going to do some dating around. All right, see, both of those things can't really be true. Either she has no idea what love is, or, she's lying to somebody. So most of us would not accept these two statements as being able to go together. So let's say you got another buddy and he's always talking about how concerned about the environment that he is, but he's dumping his used motor oil in the stream behind his house. All right, and so it's possible that he's just an idiot, but if he's really into the green movement, then you would think that he would know better. All right, he could just be super confused, or maybe the whole environmentalist thing is just BS so that he can fit in with a certain crowd or something. Doesn't seem like he genuinely cares very much about the environment. And so whatever it is, there's definitely something wrong when you see that kind of contradiction. And so the proposition that we're putting out there this morning has to do with this same thing. One of the primary ways that we're going to look at this thing is through a very simplified version of an illustration that I believe originated with the modern philosopher John Hick. It's actually a pretty cool argument. And I'm going to go so far this morning as to say that the only way to be consistent with your presuppositions is to fall in line with the Christian worldview. All right, and so I'm going to claim that Christianity is the only approach to life that gives you the ability to be consistent between what you say you believe and what your actions and your statements show that you believe. So let's take a look at how presuppositions interact with the evidence here. So take a look at the picture. And so imagine that there are two guys sitting on a train, maybe in the dining car or something, and the train pulls into the station. They look out the window of the train, and this is what they see. So there's a hillside there, and on the hillside there's some, white rocks on the grassy background, and the rocks are in a pattern that spells out the words, "The Canadian Railways welcomes you to Canada." And so the one guy says, hey, that's kind of cool that they got people to go up there and carry those rocks around and arrange them into that little welcome sign. Kind of looks like it was a lot of work. And the other guy that's sitting there says, I'm not sure that's what happened. Okay, it is on a slope after all. There are a bunch of other rocks up on the hillside. And, with erosion and weather and stuff like that, I'm sure that the rocks roll downhill sometimes. And it's entirely possible that these rocks just rolled into this pattern purely by chance. Okay, this whole thing's probably nothing but a coincidence. And so it's not a very convincing argument, but that's what the guy says. That's what he says he thinks. And really at this point, we're kind of talking about the same thing that we were talking about last week. All right, this is essentially an argument from design. Okay, that thing on the hillside looks like it was designed to me. It just happens to correlate with words that make up a sentence. And I would be extremely resistant to any theory that pointed to this happening by accident. All right, this has the marks of design all over it. On the other hand, you would have to admit that technically it is possible for rolling rocks to come to rest in a pattern. Okay? And it is theoretically possible for that pattern to look like it means something. And so in theory, it might be difficult to argue that this is impossible for this to be random. All right? I don't think so, really. And I'm going to stick with the theory that, some people put the welcome sign together. But now we come to the part of this that's about presuppositions. All right, so we continue our story with the two guys on the train. And a few minutes after they see the arrangement of rocks on the hillside, the guy who thinks that it happened all by accident, the guy who said erosion did this, says to the other guy, dude, we should get out and change some of our money over to Canadian money. And the other guy's like, what? Why should we do that? And the skeptic guy says, man, can't you read? We're at the border. We're going to need to buy some stuff once we get into Canada. All right, so this is where this all falls apart. Okay, the inconsistency is like alarmingly clear in this guy. It's one thing to claim that this all happened by accident. It's super unlikely, doesn't matter how unlikely, but okay, whatever. It's an accident. But then to turn around and say that this thing that happened by accident actually does mean something, and that there's a real message there, that the message actually relates to the reality of your present situation, is a whole nother level of ridiculous. All right, you simply cannot have this both ways. You cannot have it an accidental pattern and a message that means something. And so if you think that the arrangement of rocks means that you're supposed to change your money over, then there's no way that you actually believe that it happened by accident, no matter what you say you believe. All right, you not only believe that somebody put it there, but you also believe that this marks the border to Canada. Okay, you can't have it both ways. Your stated presuppositions don't match up with your subsequent statements and beliefs. And so this stuff happens like this all the time in all kinds of areas. And you don't have to be terribly intelligent to see that this is a flat contradiction. All right, so let's take this into some other areas of life and see how the same thing happens. And so when you try to think about the world without the infinite personal God that we described last week and earlier today, what is it that happens? And first we're going to look at this in the area of morality. All right, and so object lesson first. So say there's a piece of paper sitting on a chair and a little puff of air, wind, whatever, comes along and the paper falls onto the ground. Is that event morally good or is it morally evil? Right? And so I think most of us would respond that this event cannot be a moral event. It's inanimate bits of matter acted on by purely natural forces. There's wind and there's gravity acting on matter. There's nothing moral about this, just something that happened. So it's matter reacting to physical law, and it's not a moral event. And so if the paper falling is not a moral event because it's just matter reacting to physical law, then also nothing else that fits the same description could be called a moral event. All right, you simply cannot extrapolate morality from this kind of model. But, a lot of people view the world and everyone in it as nothing but matter and natural law. Okay, these people are called naturalists. And so the atheist thinker is basically saying that the entire world is really just matter that's reacting to physical law, and that includes all of the people and all of the creatures that are running around in the world. It's all just matter. And these people completely deny the spiritual or the supernatural side of life. And so if it's all matter that's just reacting to physical law, then how can there be any such thing as morally right or wrong? It's just not possible. And so if you run into someone that said that they don't believe that God exists, but they do believe that something that somebody is doing is morally wrong, then they are flatly contradicting what it is that they say they believe, right? And some atheists are honest enough to come to this same conclusion. All right, they can see and admit that the idea of moral norms is out if everything is just matter. Okay, but most common folks that claim to be atheists can't quite get there. Now, a lot of atheists are pretty sharp people, and, so you might wonder what they have to say about this issue, and you should look into that on your own, but I brought an example with me this morning. Most of the atheist defenses on this particular point are actually amazingly weak. Atheists have some good arguments, but this one kind of sucks. All right, so I have excerpts from a debate between J.P. Moreland and Kai Nielsen. So Nielsen was a professor and the head of the Department of Philosophy at the University of Calgary, and he died just like a year and a half ago. But he was an atheist, and he's the author of at least 16 books, including Morality Without God. All right, so this kind of makes this guy count as an expert on this subject, right? J.P. Moreland is just some Bible-believing Christian. So they have this debate, and it's written up in a few different books and articles. And so one of the books is called Does God Exist? The Great Debate. Nielsen, the atheist, says there can be purpose in life, even if there's no purpose to life. Okay. I don't really know what that means. This guy appears to be smart enough and sophisticated enough that I can barely understand what he's talking about. So let's go on and see what else he can dazzle us with. Maybe this is what he means. This is from the same page of the same book. It says, if you have some life plan, if you want to be a doctor or a professor or a political radical, whatever you want to be, if there's something you want to do in the world, you can do that. God or no God. Well, you can't really argue with that, but it doesn't really make anything morally right or wrong, right? And so according to this guy, what is it that is the determining factor in what has value and what does not have value, right? It's like whatever you want to do. And his own words are like, if you have something that you want to do, then that makes that your purpose in life. And that somehow becomes your moral good. And so under that definition, pretty much anything that you want to do is right. Well, like Hitler wanted to do what he did. Does that make it right? Does that equal morality? And so I would suggest that adopting this system is exactly the same as having no moral system at all. He goes on. He says, you say, aren't those just your personal preferences? What foundations have you? So he sees the question, right? What basis is there for what you think is right? And so he answers this question for us according to his system. It says, my conclusions rest on my considered judgments. You start with considered judgments, and then you try to get them into a coherent pattern with everything else, with the best theories of the function of morality in society, with the best theories we have about human nature, and so forth. So there it is. That's his explanation. And I'm actually quoting this pretty faithfully, okay? You should read it yourself. There's obviously more, but we don't have time to do the whole thing. And so I actually think that Moreland pretty much destroys this guy with his response. He says, under Nielsen's system, the difference between, say, Mother Teresa and Hitler is roughly the same as the difference between whether I want to be a trumpet player or be a baseball player. All right? And I think that clearly he's correct. There's just not much difference there. This is like pseudo-morality. There's no real morality here. It's all just a matter of what you want to do and what your own considered judgment says that you should do. And so I hope that you can see that to make the claim that you now have morals that you make up for yourself, even though there's no God, right? You're going to have to do better than this guy did in order to explain that. Nielsen has completely failed to carry this particular point, for sure. On the other hand, those who believe in an infinite and personal creator also believe in morality, but we believe in morality on some basis. We believe the world was created by a being who is himself a moral being. So God has a pretty clear standard of good and evil, and he has built that standard into his creation, and that includes the fabric of humanity. That's why everybody knows within themselves that certain things are wrong. All right, so people are always, making noise against racism or against genocide or some other historical atrocity. Okay, there is moral indignation that these things have happened. There is clear knowledge that these things should not happen. And you can all think of things, if you use your imagination, that you have certain knowledge that this thing is wrong. Okay, it's not just that you prefer that these things didn't happen. It's that these things are wrong and they shouldn't be done by anyone. And as Christian believers, we have a basis for believing that because we were created by a God that is himself moral. All right. Now, that doesn't at all mean that Christians always live more morally than atheists do. That's not at all the assumption that's being made here. The assumption is that moral right and wrong do exist and that must have some sort of source. And so the biblical argument is that we as people are all pretty messed up. And a lot of the times the things that we're engaged in fall way short of what God would consider morally good. The difference between a Christian and a non-Christian is not that Christians do not commit moral wrongs and non-Christians do. Okay, both groups commit moral wrongdoings. The only significant difference is that Christians are forgiven for what they do because they've trusted in the work that the good news that Paul's talked about already in this book that has accomplished for them. And so there's actually nothing hypocritical or inconsistent in a Christian arguing that moral right and wrong exist objectively at the same time that they're doing something that's morally objectionable. Okay, they're not fundamentally contradicting their argument when they do that. They're not claiming that they are moral. They are claiming that morality exists outside themselves. And so it's also interesting that other religious worldviews have the same problem that atheism has. They have trouble explaining any basis for good and evil. So pantheism is the belief that God is in all things. All of nature, all of us are part of God. And so this has just as big a problem trying to describe why anything would be right or anything would be wrong. Under pantheism, God is just as much a part of Hitler as he is, or it is, a part of Mother Teresa. They're both just dimensions of God. And this is exactly why some of the Buddhist Zen masters have straight up stated that notions of good and evil are part of the sickness of the mind. All right, the yin and the yang are both equally a part of God. And so in Eastern religions, there's really no clear basis for what's right and what's wrong because God's a part of all things. Animists have the same problem when we're talking about morality. We talked last week about the three main spiritual worldviews: theism, pantheism, and animism. And so in animism, the gods commit evil deeds. All right, the gods murder and lie and all the other things that we see in human culture. And many of the gods are explicitly into evil things, all right, in all kinds of polytheism or animism. And so there isn't a way to distinguish good from bad. These religions do have taboos, but that's a different concept than morality. And so taboo thinking usually has to do with like creepy little things like, not drinking milk on Tuesdays or something stupid like that. These are not things with clear moral content. They're just things that offend various gods or bring the anger of some god down on the person that drinks the milk or whatever. All right, there's not really an objective morality at all. And so if we're an atheist or a pantheist or an animist, we're going to find that we must go against our presuppositions in order to come forward with any kind of moral judgment at all. And the funny part of all of this is that everyone does this. Okay, you can talk to an atheist or a naturalist and you'll hear them put forward like moral positions on things. They talk about things that are wrong, even though they have no real basis for saying that. All right, so maybe who cares? All right, people are internally inconsistent, so what? All right, well, it's actually kind of a big deal. This is an internal hypocrisy. And so isn't hypocrisy when you say you believe one thing, but your life shows that you believe something other than that? Right? That's exactly what this is. And hypocrisy is very easily categorized into a form of dishonesty. And that's the real problem here. People that have no basis for moral belief still go forward and they make moral judgments. And so they're being dishonest about what they actually believe. It's the definition of hypocritical. It's the opposite of being consistent with their claimed belief system. And it's kind of a big deal. Okay, and it's one thing for a person to choose to be hypocritical. We can be critical of that, and we can say that it's not very cool. But it's actually a completely different thing if a person does not choose to be hypocritical, but they're somehow compelled to be hypocritical, right? See, certain belief systems just don't fit with reality, no matter who says that they do. And if you can't live in accordance with your belief system, then that would suggest that there is something wrong with your belief system. Okay, what you believe simply doesn't accord with reality. And so maybe you can see where this is headed. I'm saying that there are only certain sets of assumptions and bases for beliefs that fit with reality enough that you could live based on those and not contradict those assumptions or beliefs. So besides morality, we can look at the notion of human dignity. This is like about the special importance of human beings. All right, so most of us do not really hesitate to swat mosquitoes. Okay, most of us don't like balk at eating an onion if we liked onions. All right, and yet nobody denies that these are living organisms. We regularly kill them without hesitation and with no moral outrage from the people around us. Okay, happens all the time. But why are we a lot less likely to be willing to kill human beings? So the very same people that kill mosquitoes are unwilling to kill people. And people are at least as irritating as mosquitoes. All right? So just because it's a person, all of a sudden they won't kill it. What's the difference? You'll get in trouble. That's one. They're both biological entities, though. They're both alive. How come it's okay to kill one of them and not the other? What's the basis for that? And so if you're a naturalist and you believe that all things are just matter, then you really don't have a real basis to say that there's any difference at all. And so it's a popular thing to believe today that all people are equal. How is that really? How are all people equal? If Jill were here and Jill and Todd both stood up, are they equal? Right? What do we mean when we say stuff like all people are equal? And in a naturalistic world, we're not all equal. Okay? In a naturalistic world, why should I not just take what I want from the people that I can take it from? All right, there are plenty of people out there that couldn't stop me. And so there's really no basis at all to say that people are equal unless we're talking about their intrinsic value as people. And with no personal or spiritual dimension to anything, then people don't actually have intrinsic value. This all becomes like nonsense. And so people do have some naturalistic arguments for why we're not okay with killing other people, but they don't hold up. They kind of fall apart when weighed against like objectivity. Under a purely naturalistic argument, our species has no more right to survive than other species, and no biological life has any more right to survive than any other. And so on the other hand, when you come from a biblical point of view, we believe that humans do have this special significance. And it's explicitly because they've been created in accordance with the image of God. Okay, so to be created in the image of God means that he built in a spiritual and personal aspect to us, and we can sense that about ourselves and about other people. We can see very clearly that we're different from other living creatures in this regard. And the special dignity of humanity means that, people receive special consideration when we decide what is like right and wrong ways to treat them. And as personal and spiritual beings, we can say that we're equal because we all have equal value. There's a person inside each one of us, regardless of, physical attributes or various lacks of attributes or whatever. And as biblical believers, we have a basis for believing that people are more significant, whether they are good or they are evil, than other non-personal beings. And so the nature of humanity makes us capable of more beauty and more dignity and more heroism than any other created being. But we're also capable of greater atrocities. We're capable of being worse than any other creature on earth. Humans are uniquely evil. Okay, and that fits the biblical category of human beings being just like a different sort of creature than other animals. There are no animals capable of evil. Okay, it's actually a very consistent picture with what we're talking about. All right, and pantheism's got a pretty big problem in this area. Not just atheists that can't make this work. So how do you justify the special significance of humans through pantheism? I don't know. Okay, in fact, I'm not sure they even try. Okay, pantheism has set up systems where it's okay to not kill a cow while human children starve to death. Okay, it's because they're equally valuable under pantheism. All creatures are inhabited by spirits. But as like Francis Schaeffer pointed out for us a long time ago, India does not actually elevate the cow. They lower the human. All right, and we inherently and internally know that we are not like other animals. Okay, and we're not just, quantitatively different, we're qualitatively different, and that has to do with this whole spiritual dimension that we have. And so again, what does it mean when we hear someone who's a naturalist or a pantheist say that they think all people are equal? Well, it means that they're not even considering why they think that's true. They're not even thinking through what the basis would be for them to say that. Most people through most times have not believed that all people are equal. Okay, this is a fairly modern and fairly Western belief that we're talking about. It wasn't very long ago that people got away with killing their own slaves right here in this country. Okay, so people do not come up with the belief that all people are created equal all by themselves. You need a basis for believing this, and that basis is that all human beings are created in the image of a personal God. All right, so again, if you insist that you're a naturalist and you also insist that all people are equal, then you have to contradict yourself. You have no choice but to be inconsistent with your own beliefs. And that's because these beliefs simply don't fit with reality. All right, another area. This is the area of freedom of choice. So most of you will remember from high school chemistry that if you pour vinegar into baking soda, you get a bubbly reaction. All right, you get a volcano experiment. And exactly the same thing happens every time you do this. All right, we can actually predict very accurately how much CO2 is going to be released, how much matter will be left over based on how much of these two reagents we put into the mix. And so the point that I'm making is that this system is completely determined. Okay, the soda doesn't have any choice. The vinegar does not have a choice. The CO2 does not have a choice. They do whatever the laws of nature require of them, and they will do it every single time. All right, there's no variation at all. It's just how the material world works. It's a pretty simple reaction that we're talking about here. But if we have 20 different reagents that we're putting together, it really doesn't change anything. It would all still just react according to the laws of nature. The model is still essentially the same. And so what we need to see is that if you view the universe through the uniformity of cause and effect, then we are just a part of a determined sequence of causes and effects. We are part of the natural effect, and we become part of the natural cause. And if the universe is just matter, then the whole thing is a material machine, and we're just part of the machine. And so in a system like this, there cannot be anything that stands outside of that cause and effect sequence, right? And that includes you, okay? All of your thoughts, all of your actions. Unless you can bring yourself to say that there's another component to us, like a soul or a spirit, and that component does have freedom, then you are completely locked into a fully determined system. Okay, but if cause and effect explain everything, then your thoughts are determined for you. Okay, and all of the brightest atheists see this issue pretty clearly. Atheist literature refers to this notion as determinism. And it's very difficult from a purely material model to end up anywhere except pure determinism. People act the way that they do because they have been determined to act that way. All free choice is an illusion. And so is that true? All right, and I don't really intend to wade into the waters of predestination today. That's a separate issue, and it's a different chapter of Romans. But might it be true from a naturalistic point of view that all free choice is an illusion? Well, it doesn't seem very true to me. It sure seems to me like there's more at play than what I have to do. I mean, I confess I do have some tendencies. I do feel compelled in certain directions. But I can go along with or resist either one of those things. To tear a piece of paper or to fold it. It looks like I think I'm capable of deciding. Okay, and deciding differently each time if I want to. But I can't come up with a way for that to be true under any kind of materialistic model. Okay, it would be determined for me. And so if my thoughts are all determined, then there's no way to trust my own rational process. Okay, all of my conclusions would be predetermined. I'm not actually reaching my own conclusions. I'm just spitting out the determined result of a given stimulus. Okay, it's all just the same as the soda and vinegar reaction. And so unless we have authentic freedom, we have no way of knowing if our thoughts have any validity at all in relation to the real world. J.P. Moreland points out, it's important to have freedom of the will in order for there to be such a thing as human moral action or moral responsibility. That's pretty true. Okay, free will is kind of an important idea. And we can all agree, I would think, that people that herd other people into gas chambers should be punished. Okay, that is a standard human atrocity. It's awful, and the people responsible need to pay for it. But should we also punish the gas chamber? Right? It was also involved in the atrocity. If a crime is committed with a baseball bat, do we send the bat to jail? Of course not, right? Like, we hold responsible the free choosing moral agent that wielded the unchoosing device. The guilty party is the party that did the choosing. Stuff is so obvious that it's painful to go over it. Okay, it seems like I must be making fun of something. All right, but we actually have to have freedom of thought if we're going to argue for moral responsibility. In any other model, people are just doing what they're determined to do. They can't help it. And if they can't help it, then how are they morally responsible? Okay, and so, like, love also becomes a meaningless concept in a, mechanistic model. Under naturalism and determinism, love is reduced to like mating responses and imagination. No such thing as real love. And so every single time that we protest a rapist and we say that it's evil, and every time that we're indignant at the racism that's displayed by someone, we are demonstrating that what we really believe is that those people that do those things are not really determined to be that way. They have choice, and so they are responsible for what they do. And if they have a choice, right, then we can hold them responsible. If they have no choice, it's just a soda and vinegar reaction. And what are we so angry about? Right? So the position of Christianity is totally different than that. And so we would not really say that humans are completely free in their choices because of this episode that we refer to as the fall that happened a while back in a garden somewhere. Now, God did originally create humans with complete freedom of choice. But when humanity fell, our freedom of choice became inhibited. All right, it's suppressed to a certain extent. And now we find ourselves tied up in things that, can get a pretty good grip on our ability to choose. But even though we've lost some of our ability to choose, we believe that there is a significant amount of freedom left. All right, freedom is diminished because of the fall, but it's still there. And this is especially true in the area of our freedom to choose how to react to God. And so whether or not we accept his gift is a choice that every one of us is free enough to make. And so this passage in Romans that we're reading says that it is evident within their hearts that an infinite and personal God is there. And God makes sure that they know that he's there. And so most of us have not studied pantheism very much, even though it's actually pretty popular in the world. Under most pantheist worldviews, everything that happens is dictated by the laws of karma. Everything that happens to anyone is a result of something that happened in a previous life, and they have it coming. It's inevitable. It's determined. So the concept of karma is an inviolable law of retribution. Okay, in fact, that's what the word means in Sanskrit. All right, retribution. And so there's no basis at all for struggling against social evil inside the system of karma. Okay, you have to come to theism before there's a basis for saying that a lot of what goes on around us is wrong, and we should do something about it. It is theists that do not derive their sense of right and wrong from what their culture says. Okay, but rather it is derived from the character of the infinite personal God that created us all. He's the standard that we answer to. All right, we could have done this kind of deconstruction in many different areas. These are just, 3 easy ones that I picked. If you want to go deeper into this idea, there are a bunch of good, presuppositional apologists. I'm happy to point you in the right direction. But the point of all of them is the same. Okay, if you're not sitting on the assumptions of an infinite and personal God that created the earth, then you are forced to live in a way that directly contradicts with what you say you believe. But if you assume theism, then everything becomes consistent and everything makes sense. All right, and this is true because certain presuppositions fit the real world that we live in and some do not. Okay, this can actually be a fairly powerful argument for some people. It deserves some time and reflection. So, we come back to the Word of God here, and it says, that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. And so I can look into myself and see certain things. I'm not a mosquito. All right. I'm not a soda and vinegar reaction. We all know these things are true on almost every meaningful level. And we can see that this leads to the conclusion that there must be something different about me. And where would that come from? All right, if there's anything like a soul in there, then it was put there. Okay, there is no natural explanation for anything even remotely like that. And there's a pretty good chance that whoever put that personal and spiritual dimension in me is a personal and spiritual being. Okay, it's evident within them. And so we're saying that when we believe that people are significant, free, moral beings, we imply that God must have created them with a spiritual nature. Any effort to deny that runs us right back up on the rocks. Okay, there's no basis for anything that we know to be true without this also being true. And if we turn around and deny that such a God created us, then we're confused or we're dishonest. And I would suggest that this second one is much more likely to be true. Okay, I think that most people actually do see the implications that are evident within them. Okay, we may not want to face the God that we know is there, but that doesn't make him not there. In fact, many people don't want to face him. And that's why verse 18 says, "For the anger of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." All right, so we sense the things that we've talked about this morning. We are moral beings. We are personal and spiritual beings. But, a bunch of people are uncomfortable with that thought. We don't want to face it because it takes away the autonomy that we currently can pretend that we have. Okay, our pride gets in the way, and we don't want to be accountable to anyone, and we don't want to bow to anyone. And based on that, we suppress the truth. And so we would rather be internally inconsistent. We would rather adopt positions that deny themselves than face the obvious truth in front of us and accept it. And so the reason that this angers God is because we are choosing to manufacture a belief that we find more palatable than the thing that we know in our heart to be true. All right. So let's wrap this up. First of all, again, I am not suggesting that Christians necessarily have a better handle on morality than other people or worldviews. That is absolutely not what I believe and not what I think the evidence bears out. Okay, all I'm saying is that God made himself evident within us. And so we need to pay some attention to that. We need to come to accept that fact and not suppress it. And to even be sitting here considering where we may have come from makes us very, very different than other beings. Okay? We are different. And this is not just a material event or a chemical reaction. And we need to be able to face that. Especially since our own actions show that at some level, we already know that a personal God made us. Okay, we need to choose not to suppress that. And we need to ask the basic questions that follow coming to that kind of conclusion. Okay, and who is this God that is obvious from looking inside myself, right? What's he like? We can determine and answer that question. And how can you get to know that God personally? How can you be with him forever? How do we make ourselves right with God? Okay, you need to start by taking, your honest search for the truth to him personally. How would it hurt anything to call out to God and ask him if he's really there? Okay, if he's really there, it'll change everything for you. If an infinite personal God exists, then he will hear you, and the next few weeks are going to be crazy for you. All right? You're going to find before long that you are virtually certain that you were created by an infinite personal God. All right? And if you're not willing to do that, then it's not because you're afraid that no one will answer. It's because you're afraid that someone will answer. All right? Be honest with yourself. And, you're going to want to keep seeing and hearing the rest of the good news that we're going to be studying in the book of Romans. And so this book is absolutely about answering all these big questions. All right? And so we're going to draw the line there this morning. Next week, we're going to get into one of the biggest objections to this theist view, right? If God is so good, why is this creation so evil? All right. And we're also going to look at what has God done about evil, right? If this God's good, why evil and why is he allowing it? And so after that, we'll jump into the rest of Romans. Should be fun. But that's what I have for this Christmas Eve morning.